my first YouTube video. I've never made a video before, but figured I'd give it a shot with as much as the content I consume and podcast and all the great creators that are on YouTube. I'm filming with a GoPro because it was a little cheap camera I could get a hold of, and I have it rubber banded to a clothes hanger, and that's my camera stick for now. Today I figured I'd talk about some of the books I have, recommend a few, go over a couple, because I don't know much. I figure if I'm going to make a video, might as well talk about something that I know. So here's some of the books I have, and we're going to go over a few of them, the ones that I like, ones that I haven't read, ones that I'd like to read, and just kind of go from there. So the last book I just finished was The Great Gatsby, and I'm sure most people read that in high school. I actually didn't read it in high school. The class I was taking, we didn't read that one. A buddy of mine did, but I figured I'd give it a shot. You know, everybody's got to read those great works, and I gotta say, Great Gatsby was awesome. The way Fitzgerald writes, it's like something that you'd read today. Very, very conversational, not stuffy like it was written 100 years ago. Kind of, it reminded me like an episode of Seinfeld or Friends or something. The drama, the cattiness, the neurosis that they had. Excellent, excellent book. Other novels that I've been reading, there's a series that I read called the Lee Porn and She novels. They're Navajo Tribal Police. It's by Tony Hillerman. Series, he's got like 20 or something books. And they're out in the Navajo reservation, and they're cops, and they solve the mysteries out there. Great series, fun read, very informational as far as the accuracy to the Navajos and the different Native American tribes out there. Another series I read, and these are kind of my easy reading books that I'll read at lunch at work, is a private detective series called the Spencer Novels by Robert B. Parker. Here's the first one I ever got. It's called Hush Money. And it's written in first person, so it's, the hard-boiled detective novel, like, I was sitting in my office, and then, the broad came in, and yet, good books. He always wins in the end, he's got his sidekick, but they're fun to read. What else do we got? Oh, as far as novels, probably my favorite one would be No Country for Old Men by Cormac McCarthy. And they made it into a movie that won Best Picture in 2007. Just fantastic. 1980, West Texas, guy finds some drug money. There's a hitman trying to find him, and it's kind of like a noir film, kind of like a Western put together. Tommy Lee Jones, Javier Bardem, Josh Brolin. Just great movie, great book. The movie is basically the text of the book, so it's very accurate to the book. I'd recommend that. Also by Cormac McCarthy, if you're trying to get depressed, is The Road. Now, a lot of people have read The Road. That's been made into a movie as well. A guy and his son walking down this road across the country in an untold post-apocalyptic world, and trying to keep their morality during all of this. Goes into the kind of corners that your mind would go faced with extenuating circumstances, and how a man protecting his son would go through those, and the challenges they face. Excellent writing, though. You really feel like you're there. Got some grapefruit bubbly water. What are you going to do? Good stuff. Let's see here. Oh, probably one of the best books I've ever read, and it's the guy I have on my shirt, Jordan Peterson. I'm sure you guys have all heard of 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos. Now, he had written another book 20 years earlier or so, Maps of Meaning, about the architecture of belief, religion, science, politics, Carl Jungian archetypes, psychology, how that all intertwines into people's systems of belief, and how they make people behave, how they proceed in the world, and why some ideas work and some ideas don't, and their underpinning motivations for them, I guess you'd say. And 12 Rules for Life is kind of a more practical way to carry out a lot more of the complicated text that he wrote, about improving your life through finding a greater meaning. He's a great thinker, a great speaker, his biblical lectures, his college course lectures that he teaches. Good stuff. He actually had a debate with this guy, Sam Harris, who wrote The Moral Landscape. He's one of the new atheists, they call him. It was him and Daniel Dennett and Christopher Hitchens and who was the third guy? Dawkins, Richard Dawkins. And Sam Harris wrote this book, The Moral Landscape, and it's about the whole facts versus values issue that people talk about. How can you proceed in the world? You have to have an interpretive structure. He says, no, we can understand science and then extrapolate our understanding of science to get values out of them. So very controversial in the morality segment of science, but that's kind of what his realm is. So very, very good work. Incredibly smart guy. And him and Jordan Peterson had 3 debates. Three or four debates about basically science versus religious thinking, and how to proceed through the world. Excellent stuff if you're in for high level discussion of that matter. What else do we have as far as complicated stuff? Nietzsche. I have a couple books by Nietzsche. Thus Spake Zarathustra and Beyond Good and Evil. German philosopher in the 1870s, 1860s. Kind of a precursor to what became existentialism through his understanding of the birth of nihilism due to the death of God. So he was very prophetic in his philosophy. What else do we have? Maybe something on the lighter side. We got this. Biography of Teddy Roosevelt. Now, he was my favorite president. He was kind of before I read the book, but after I read the book, man, you just go into... The guy was just a big dog, you know? Nobody liked him on either side of the political aisle, but he was real tough, real sensible, did stuff like do the... what canal was it? The Panama Canal, stopped a war that was about to happen between Russia and Japan, gave us a bunch of our national parks, national forest, just all kinds of stuff that nobody ever talks about. Oh yeah, busted up all the trust in the early 1900s. So everybody was upset at him for something, but he was a really tough guy, played a bunch of sports, really strong, hunted, had a lot of good, quotes about life, and good book, good biography. Let's see here. Got a lot of nonfiction books. Like I said, I read mostly fiction for easy reading, like at lunch and stuff. I love reading fiction, but I like getting information from nonfiction books. As far as fiction, couple of these guys. Franz Kafka. Now, you've probably heard the word Kafkaesque to describe like something surreal or kind of absurdist in writing. So he has one that's probably the most famous, The Metamorphosis, and it's about a guy that wakes up and he has turned into a giant bug. But that's not what he's concerned about. He's concerned that he won't be able to go to work, his boss will be mad at him, and that he's going to be inconveniencing the family that he lives with. So it kind of goes into the absurd mind of people and dealing with anxious situation. And he was writing in the early 1900s. So talking about kind of the grind of things, the rat race before that was really even a thing, gave rise to surreal literature. And he died really young too from some sort of mental disorder. Other literature, great literature by crazy people, Fyodor Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment. Now, if you want to read a book that goes into the mind of somebody in a tricky situation, Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment, it's not really given away. The whole premise of the book is he killed somebody where he thought it was justified, but after doing it, it messes him up so much that the entire plot of the story is that the punishment is him in his head trying to deal with his actions and cover it up. And long book, but Dostoevsky, man, it's another one of those things like F. Scott Fitzgerald. The writing doesn't feel like it's for the time. It's not stuffy. It's not dry. It's very engaging, and you follow along like it's a thriller. Pardon me, get another drink. Man, I love bubbly water. If I could drink it instead of regular water every day, I would. That's goals, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, what else do we got? Some books about Texas. I live in Texas. Love Texas. I think it's the best state. in the country, in the best country in the world. So by definition, Texas is the best place in the world, and you can quote me on that. We got this one book, Passionate Nation, and it's a history of Texas, chopped full of information equivalent to what you would get in a textbook, but written almost like a story, from the Spanish colonization of Texas in the 1500s all the way up to, I think, Obama's presidency. And it's very thorough, very easy to read, and you realize that the history of Texas, I'm going to say this obviously biased, but is very, very, very intense compared to a lot of other states, just because it was owned by Spain and France and Native Americans, and then it was a republic by itself, and then it was part of the Confederacy, and then it became part of the United States. So it had all these different histories that gave us our character, and kind of why Texas is so well known for its independent attitude and difference from the rest of the United States. Great book nonetheless. Also, the couple books about Texas I have, more so the Hispanic people in Texas, and Living on the Edge of America, and let's see here if I can get it out. If you can see that, The Poorest of Americans, by a guy named Robert Merrill. He's an author that lived down in the valley, down by Brownsville, Harlingen. What else is down there? I forget the other cities. There's like 3 cities right down there in the valley by Matamoros. And he lived down there. He was a teacher at a technical college. And he writes about in Poorest of Americans, in Living on the Edge of America, he talks about his experience just living down there, and the people he came into contact with, their way of life, and how it differed from the rest of Texas, the rest of America. And I think it was written in the 70s, so it was even different than probably what's going on today. Probably a lot less crime. And then Poorest of Americans is a more modern book. I think it was written in the 90s, early 2000s, that was more so going into statistics on the Hispanic people living in Texas and their way of life, and how it's so radically different than the Anglo people that they call them, especially the ones that come from Mexico to get a better life. They do better than their family living in Mexico, but they're still in drastic poverty down in the valley. And then the ones that are here illegally, whatever you think about that, they can't get access to the same services that citizens of the United States have, because they'll make themselves known and then they'll get deported. So they kind of have to live in the shadows in this real, almost post-apocalyptic way, kind of scavenging stuff for building their houses, relying on friends to help them with vehicles or fixing their homes, or that kind of stuff. And it's a very data-driven book, but it's good to know about the people living around you. A lot of Hispanic people in Texas, love them to death. Great food, great culture, had a lot of Hispanic friends, and these books go into a lot of how they exist inside Texas itself. What else do we got? Oh, here's one. If you want a book that'll keep you up at night, Ordinary Men by Christopher Browning. And this is a book about, I think they were Polish. They were a police force during Hitler's takeover of Poland. Now, they weren't Nazis per se, like, they had came up in Hitler Youth. They were already, Joe Sixpack by the time Hitler had taken over. And, a lot of the Jews had already been put in camps, and they were kind of put together as a ragtag bunch of policemen to clean up the excess. And it goes into how they were ordered to do worse and worse thing to the Jewish people and the gypsies and all the different people that went to the camps over, several months, from just, rounding them up, putting them in a ghetto, to shooting pregnant women in the back of the head. And it goes into the minds of the people that were doing this, and how nobody wanted to leave and leave the police battalion because they didn't want to leave their friends to do the dirty work, and they hated what they had to do. But their guy that was in charge was like, you can quit at any time, I know this is going to be grisly work, but no one did, just for the sake of, they didn't want to be the one guy that was too weak to do it and leave their friends. So it's a dark book going into that. Another dark book, I actually have it lent out to a friend right now, but if you want a book that'll just terrify you out of your skull, The Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Now, he was in a couple of the Soviet gulags during Stalin's reign of the Soviet Union, and it documents just the horrors that went on in the Soviet Union gulags for people both of different races, different countries, but a lot of internal repression. Russian citizens, he was in the Russian military. Russian military people put in these gulags and tortured for years for basically nothing. And he goes into how it was completely justified by the communist idea, and of course they were going to have these gulags that killed 50 million people. It may not be 50 million, but there was definitely millions and millions of people that died from either starvation in the Soviet Union, part of the Soviet military, or in the gulags, all because of Stalin trying to push the communist regime. And he details it in just graphic detail, and explains how communism isn't even a viable option for governance, because that's what you end up with. A man at the top that's pure evil. He says Satan is only second to Joseph Stalin. But that book, man, if you want to realize the evil depths that humans can go to, read the Gulag Archipelago. But it also talks about that the job of the individual is to avoid that evil propensity you might have in you, so that you yourself don't end up being somebody like the Soviets, and that if a lot of people do that, you're not going to end up with an entire country lying to each other and pretending that communism under the USSR is the best thing that ever happened, because that's what happened. It was illegal to say that the communist utopia that Stalin and Lenin had brought about was wrong, so everybody had to agree with it, or else you'd go to the Gulag. Terrifying book. What else do we got? A bunch of random books that you just kind of pick up. The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli. What's his first name? It just says Machiavelli on the book. Let's see here. That's a classic. Here's one. Some people know, depending on what world you're in, there's a book called A Sand County Almanac by Alda Leopold. Now, he was a conservationist, and after, what was the guy's name? John Audubon. Yeah, after John Audubon, he was a conservationist that he writes all these stories about living in the different parts of the United States and the lifestyle living amongst animals, and he was a big proponent of hunting, but conservation and how they tied together, and he was writing in the 40s, so he was really ahead of his time, and he was a very, very good, he was a good writer as far as literature is concerned. It writes very poetically about his time, living in cabins, or living in the desert, or living in the middle of Minnesota in the snowstorms, and kind of his observance of people's place in the environment as a whole. So that's a good book to read if you're interested in environmentalism and how that gets into politics or social life, or even the science of it, or you just want to read a book about a guy living amongst animals. Good read too. Another interesting book, if we're talking interesting books, this book, A Billion Wicked Thoughts: What the World's Largest Experiment Reveals About Human Desire. Now, this book is really strange because it's very data-driven and contextual, but what happened was these couple of guys did some data mining on people's pornography searches, like really dirty stuff, to figure out what people are into and how that corresponds with neurochemistry and psychological development, and what we can learn about humans scientifically due to our desires and what we look up on internet sites, and how that plays into the social world. Interesting scientific study as far as if you're interested in sociology or social psychology. Let's see here. What else do we got? Charisma Myth, Olivia Fox Cabane. Resilience, Eric Greitens. He was an ex-Navy SEAL, wrote this book. Hard-Won Wisdom for Living a Better Life. It's a compilation of a bunch of letters he wrote to a friend of his that was also a Navy SEAL, that got out of, I think it was Afghanistan, may have been Iraq, but I think it was Afghanistan, with PTSD and really bad alcoholism. He was writing these letters to encourage him to build up mental resilience and overcome this really bad part of his life. But you read the letters, and it's stuff that applies to anybody going through a dark time or just needing motivation or some better discipline to get through the world. Some books I need to read. Well, I got a whole bunch of, got some more Tony Hillerman books, the Lee Portnoy novels. Always picking those up at a bookstore because, they're like $1 or $2, and you can breeze through them. Same with the Robert Parker Spencer novels. Always have a couple of those on hand. The ones I have that I need to read, Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone. I've heard that recommended by a few different people. Ben Shapiro, this guy I watch on YouTube called Political Juice. Let's see here. Jonathan Haidt, The Righteous Mind. I still need to get The Coddling of the American Mind, where he goes into how PC culture developed at the university system and it's kind of spread into broader society. I'm pretty sure from what I've heard from him on Joe Rogan and people referencing him that it's very academic, and like they pinned it down to I think like 2013 when the whole SJW types started their big movement on social media, and the university started to get real hesitant about having conservative speakers, and how that extrapolates to society as a whole, with people going soft, as they say, and maybe what are the implications of that. So I'm very interested to read that book if I can find it at a used bookstore. Oh, and then Aristotle, Nicomachean Ethics, another one of those ones that, they say you got to read the great works. I figure I'd give that a shot. I haven't really read many of the classics. I took a classical literature class in college, but I don't remember much from that. Let's see if there's anything else worth mentioning. I got a whole bunch of books that I need to read that I have on a little thing in one of my little notebooks. You're always kind of keeping your eye out for something like 30 different books. I'll name a few of the interesting ones that I really try to get my hands on. A couple of Jocko Willink's books, Extreme Ownership and then The Dichotomy of Leadership I'd like to read. Because that's one thing I don't have a lot of experience with, but I'd like to, is leadership and having people underneath you to deal with and take responsibility for, and being in a workplace that involves a lot more negotiation and tactfulness. Because I work construction, I work by myself a lot, so I don't have to deal with any of that. Let's see here. I got Bowling Alone, that's on here. Oh, Coming Apart and Suicide of the West. I like cultural commentary about, United States Western culture as a whole and where that's going, where the weak points are, where it needs to improve. I think some of these books were written in the 60s, so it'll be interesting to see what people that many years ago had to say about what they thought about the United States and American ideas back then. Lord of the Flies is on there. I remember reading that in high school and it being really dark, but I don't think because I was in 9th grade, I don't think I was definitely old enough to appreciate what I know Lord of the Flies was talking about, and I'd love to reread that book. Let's see here. Macbeth. I'd like to just have that. Macbeth's my favorite Shakespeare. I've done several reports on it from high school to college. I don't like a lot of the rest of Shakespeare, not because I think it's bad, it's just I'm not a fan of that kind of stuff, but Macbeth, man, I love it. There's a PBS masterpiece where Patrick Stewart, Captain Jean-Luc Picard, plays Macbeth, and it takes place in like the 40s, like they were in some kind of World War II battles, but it still has all the Shakespearean language, so it's really interesting, and Patrick Stewart does an excellent job playing Macbeth, and I think Kate Winslet plays Lady Macbeth. I would really recommend checking that out. Unit 731. That's a book I want to get. Apparently that's supposed to be like the most grisly graphic book about World War II happenings that there ever has been. The Japanese military tests on the Chinese citizens in the 30s and early 40s, I think. Whoosh. It's like Dr. Mengele, except times 10. And then, let's see here. Savage Messiah, which is a book, I forget who it's written by, but it goes into kind of Jordan Peterson's rise into the public sphere and his influence on preserving Western ideas, getting young people to take responsibility for their lives, and hopefully not shirk off the great attitudes that the West has both created and taken from different parts of the world, and being grateful for that. Um, that's really all I have to say today. Like I said, this is the first video I've ever made. We'll see how it goes. If it turns out okay, maybe I'll make some more. You guys let me know what you think. By the way, my name's Tanner, if you're wondering. I'll do some more book reviews, maybe more in depth. More books I get. Recommend me some books that you'd like me to read. I hope you guys are all well. This is, during the coronavirus. I don't think I can say that on YouTube. The, COVID-19 virus. I hope everybody's staying safe, being responsible, being level-headed. Until next time, I guess I'll be seeing you later. Adios.